Oi, oi, oi. Good to see you, YouTube. Today, we're going to be talking about the developer update and what's going into the mid-chapter update that we are anticipating very soon, actually. It just feels like Nemesis just came out, but it's been a few weeks, and so we're going to be looking into the developer update, which will primarily buff Trickster. So let's talk about this. I've already read through all this, but I want to talk to you guys about the changes. As a Trickster main, I got some insight here that I want to share. So we're going to go and read through all of it, and so you guys can sit back and relax. So basically the big thing they're doing is they say, it's been a few months since the launch of the All Kill chapter. It's time for the Trickster's post-launch review. This is something we do for all new killers once they've had a few months to settle into the game. This is something that you guys all need to know. When a killer comes out, they will be drastically reevaluated during the mid-chapter following that. So we had All Kill, Nemesis, mid-chapter. The mid-chapter will always refer to the killer before the most recent one. They say reviewing the data of the Trickster tends to fall on the lower end of the roster, even among the top few percent of Trickster players. So we feel comfortable making some improvements to him to bring him up a few spots. And they've made some changes, and I actually don't know, they sound okay, but I don't know that they make him necessarily like stronger. So I'm a little nervous, but so the number of knives required to damage a survivor has been reduced to 6, down from 8. I just don't think this was the way to really go with Trickster, because the lower that number gets, the closer he is to Huntress. I would have preferred I've talked about this before, but I would have preferred a change to the laceration meter, a hard stop or something like that, right? So it used to be there were 8 knives required to fully lacerate somebody. In my mind, I said, okay, well, how about we make the decay hard stop at 50%? So 50% is 4 knives. If I run up on somebody and hit somebody with 5 knives, and then I chase somebody else and start, committing to them, the person that I hit with 5 knives will decay down to 50%, but the next time I see them, that chase is faster. I think a more complex skill-based approach, so that Trickster as a killer has to do some like setup, and it's up to the person playing them to understand that setup and to think ahead. I think that would have been much better. And in this case, with the 50% hard stop, if you only hit somebody with 3 knives, which is not 50% or higher, it would decay to 0. And I think that would have been a much better change. Yes, it would have been technically maybe not very difficult to pull off, but it's kind of boring, I think, to just go, you just have to throw 4 less knives for the down. Because really, 4 less knives for the down this way is still 12 knives total, right? Instead of being able to prime somebody and then come back to them later or something like that. And again, I've talked about it before, but mending mechanics where it's like, how about you pull the knives out, stuff like that. I don't think that's very fun. Having survivors just hold like M1 on themselves to pull knives out and stuff is not, I think, the way that I would have gone. So I'm glad they didn't do any mending or anything like that, but I think it is like overall pretty boring to just sort of reduce the amount of knives required to 6. It's just because with the Melodious Murder, the old USB, it was 7 to fully lacerate. Now it's only 6. It's just, I don't know. It doesn't, he's not going to feel a lot better. And I was hoping to see his skill ceiling go up and, have more variables for him to work off of. I just don't think this is the right way to go. But they say the delay before laceration decay starts has been reduced to 10 seconds. What it used to be is you would hit survivors with knives, and then after 20 seconds of no knives, it would start to decay. Now it is reduced to 10. So after 10 seconds, you'll see the decay go down, which is, it's a nerf, quite frankly. So now it takes fewer knives, but the decay is faster. So if somebody uses Lithe, they hit Shack Window, and they just run for 10 seconds, and they get behind something else, you see a decay. So I don't know. This just doesn't feel, in my mind, I'm okay. What I will say is I'm excited to get my hands on it and see what it really feels like, but there's a lot of concern wrapped up in this. The rate of decay for laceration has been increased to 0.3 seconds while running and 0.4 seconds all other times, and that's up. So the decay is faster when it starts too. So I don't, counterplaying against the Trickster was not ever anything that was like incredibly difficult, as long as you're anywhere that has tall walls like Shack or near jungle gyms or things like that. And that's the issue with Trickster, is that at these tiles, he's not great. He's really not, because even to get 6 or 12 knives at these tiles, it's going to be tough. It's really going to be tough. So you're just ability-less. And that's fine to not be able to use your ability at every one of these tiles. But it's very difficult that somebody can get to one of these tiles, and after 10 seconds, their laceration meter not only starts decaying, but decays incredibly quickly. Yes, there is some counterplay for survivors there, and I'm excited for that, but I don't feel like the knife change was enough to offset any of this. So I don't know. I have complicated feelings on this, and I think the dev team could have done more technically to make this happen. Just lowering metrics, like I get it, they're very, very busy, but just lowering that number just feels weird to me. So they say that they've also reduced the amount of laceration lost for hitting a survivor with a basic attack. Previously, if somebody, had knives in them and you M1 them, they would lose some of that laceration meter. Now it's not as punishing. In theory, because it takes 6 to fully lacerate somebody, you could throw 4 or even 5 M1 somebody, and you'll lose 3 of those knives, and then you can further throw more knives. And there is a technique to this. A lot of people actually don't use this very often, but if you can knife, and then like M1, and while they're sprinting, if they're leaving to get to another tile, finish them off with knives. There is something to that, and I'm glad that's there, but it's just, I mean, it's like it's an aside. They did look at main event. They didn't quite give us what we wanted, I think, for main event, but there are some interesting changes. So main event activation time has been shortened to 0.5 seconds, down from 1.5. This was an important change. The problem with main event is you would be in the middle of a chase and you'd get it, but you're like, if I use main event now, by the time I can actually start throwing the knives again, the person's behind a corner, and when you're in main event, you move at the 96% movement speed, so they're gaining distance on you, right? So having to pop main event and then just wait, I'm gonna get you, it just didn't work very well. So this is not bad. This isn't awful. The number of knives required to activate main event has been increased to 30. So now you'll see main event popping up less often. 10 more knives isn't that big of a deal. But you'll also see that hopefully because of this increase, it stops popping up at like really awful times. Maybe, right? They also increased the amount of time that you can hold main event to 30 seconds, up from 10 seconds. I still don't really get it. Oni is a killer that can like instantly pop. Well, not instantly. He could just hold his ability and then decide when he wants to like rage out and go after people. And then you have Bubba, who literally just has a chainsaw. And yes, it has like cooldowns and mechanics and things like that. But generally, like, he can kind of just use it when it just feels strange to have main event something that like goes away. 30 seconds is going to be decent. I think one of the weirdest things is, and it happens often, is getting main event when you have just downed a survivor. My final life or my final 3 knives, I hit somebody and, oh, now I'm just sitting on main event. And by the time I pick somebody up, walk to a hook, it's been 15 seconds, by the time they're down, pick up, hook. And then I have maybe 15 more seconds to go find somebody else. But even then, again, you get reduced to 96% movement speed. So, even if you're like, oh, I got 2 seconds of it left, let me just pop it and get some knives on somebody. If they run early, they still, it's weird. 30 seconds isn't bad. I'm glad that got a buff, but I just think that you should be able to hold it, a little bit longer, indefinitely. There feels like they're kind of, and I get it, they don't want to over buff Trickster, so suddenly he's a monster, but these are all pretty small things, and they're kind of inching towards like a solution. And I hope they buff him again, but I don't know. So just in summation, with regards to his base kit changes, it requires less knives, but laceration meter starts sooner and goes faster. Which, when you look at all that together, it's just like buff, nerf, nerf. So I don't know. I'm going to try to be optimistic, because I am very good with Trickster, and maybe he does work out better for me. We'll see what happens. And then the main event change. Main event, the change for main event as a total is good. Is it as good as we would like? No, but we'll see what happens with it. Maybe it gets changed out of PTB for the mid chapter. So anyway, moving on, they changed the Melodious Murder. That is the USB. It used to actually reduce the amount of knives required. Because they already reduced the amount of knives required, they're changing that whole add-on. So they've given it an increased reload speed at locker. So it's not quite Iron Maiden, but a little Iron Maiden, so that you don't maybe have to run Iron Maiden, okay? The Fizz Spin Soda, so that would increase your initial throw rate. And what that means is that, you know, as you start throwing knives with Trickster, that rate builds and curves upwards. It would start you off as if you had already thrown 3 knives. So you would already be pretty well into that curve. They've changed it so that you're 2 knives into the curve instead of 3. They changed the iridescent photo card. When a survivor is 2 or fewer blades away from the maximum, they'll be exposed. That add-on is still really a problem, I think, personally, but they have the Death Throws compilation. So that was the one that would sort of exponentially stack, but if you missed a knife, then it would go down to being 0.5 of a charge of laceration. They changed that one, which I actually like this change. Now Death Throws compilation will replenish the Trickster's knives when main event ends. I think that's when you use it and it ends. So free reload is actually, that's a good add-on now. Like, that's a very good add-on. It's truly an iridescent add-on that anybody can use regardless of their skill, which I think is important for the balance of the game. Lucky Blade and Waiting for You Watch have been changed because they didn't really get used at all. Hitting a survivor with a blade during main event will extend main event's duration. So if you hit multiple knives, you can just keep using main event. Again, I don't know that that's going to be used a lot. I don't know that it's actually very helpful, but we'll see what happens. So they've also they've changed the perks. So No Way Out is the perk that would lock the exit gates. Now, I ran into this a lot. What would happen is if survivors were being chased or if they were healing each other or I was chasing another survivor to go to chase the survivor, right? And then other survivors would just heal in front of the door until I got somebody on hook, and then they would start opening the door. It just didn't really feel like it was doing a ton because people could just wait it out, because generally when the gens pop, the killer's preoccupied, right? So they've changed it, and I like this, all right? They increased the base time of the perk to 12 seconds. So no matter how many hooks you get, the exit gates are locked for 12 seconds. They increased the bonus time for each token. You can get up to 4 tokens. So respectively, you have 60 seconds now if you get 4 tokens where they can't touch the exit gates. But the perk only activates when a survivor interacts with an exit gate for the first time. So the perk doesn't activate the minute the gens are done. When a survivor goes to touch the door, then they go, oh, holy shit, and then they lock, which is really great because some survivors will just, if they're really altruistic or they're too far from doors or something like that, they may not mess with it, and then you get a loud noise notification and you could beeline it there, which is just, that makes this perk very good. Even if you're not running a full NOED Remember Me build or whatever, that's kind of it's a really good perk now. I like that a lot. These changes, like they said, increase potential time from 46 to 60 seconds. So I really like that. I think that's a good change. Hex Crowd Control. I mean, nobody's run that perk. You know, it used to be if somebody vaults a window, they would lock that window. But it was a totem. So it was one of those things where it was like, it's just not getting a lot of use. Increase the time a window stays blocked from 10, 12, 14 seconds to 14, 17, 20 seconds. So they've just increased the amount of time. I'm not saying it's like the worst perk in the world, but it's not strong enough to really like warrant, in my opinion, like a totem. I don't know. It just feels weird. I've run Bamboozle over it so many times. So if you guys did not know, these survivors are getting visual updates, all right? And I'm so excited for this visual update, all right? These are part of the Realm Beyond, where they update the maps and they update everything visually for the game. And honestly, the characters kind of need it to some degree. So they say, with that said, we've had some people ask why. When the game first launched, a lot of things characters included featured a completely different art style. You'll see still some of the traces of that in the original Survivors. If you look closely at Dwight's shirt, you'll notice a watercolor effect that isn't used anymore. Back then, it was easier to use like low poly textures and different art styles to have a game that runs better, right? The more fidelity, the higher the textures, the more difficult it was to optimize that, especially if if they weren't quite sure how to optimize it and things like that, right? Technology's come a long way in 5 years for game dev, but yeah, we could definitely see those old textures, all right? So they say this left some of the more recent survivors looking great, while others started to feel dated. Our goal with these changes is not to change the characters significantly, but rather bring them up to date. We've been playing with these survivors for years, and some of us have grown very attached to them. Some of you a little too much. We've seen that art you've made. lewd. This is part of the reason we've been sharing previews for so long. We've been we've been combing through your feedback to make sure that the updated versions of each survivor are as similar as possible to the ones that you know and love. If you've been losing sleep over David King's smaller brow, you can rest easy. We've gone back and made some adjustments. With that said, here's a quick taste of what you can expect in case you've missed the many teasers. Please keep in mind that these previews do not include animations, so expressions like Ace's trademark smirk will not appear here. All right. So if we go through, Meg, actually, the previews that they showed on Twitter, they kind of rolled back a lot of those previews because this Meg looks very similar to the Meg that we have in-game now, in my opinion. So it's actually interesting to see that they kind of went back to that a little bit. We do see David, again, slightly change. The hair textures on all these guys you'll kind of notice is different, especially on Claudette. You can see the hair texture is much better, much different. And then we have Nia, and I think Nia is the biggest change you can see here. I love this new Nia look, and depending on how the animations change it, I'm very excited for that. And this will drop in the mid-chapter, so this will be during that PTB. Tutorials are getting updated. So if you guys did not know, there are brand new tutorials that will be going into the game. Even though the old ones just kind of got overhauled a little bit, it'll be a little bit better. And it says each tutorial also takes place in a single continuous level. So the current tutorial isn't bad, but it's like micro slices, and it doesn't look or feel the same as what the actual game looks or feels like, because it's just like you and a gen and it goes repair the gen. It's not the same as a trial. So the new tutorials will actually take place in a trial that gets kind of paused and things like that, so that you kind of understand what you're doing a little bit better. All right. Now, after that, there will be bot matches before you jump into online, of course. So bot matches are available in the live version of the game. You guys should know that. Now, they've added beginner tooltips to the menus so that when you're loading and things like that as well, you'll kind of see some stuff that you didn't see before, as well as hovering over most buttons will let you know what they do. So that's a big deal for new players. You'll be able to kind of, what does this do? Ah, easy. All right. So they've changed some HUD. They've made some improvements to the HUD. You can toggle on and off some certain things like scoring events, player names, and killer hook counter. This is a huge deal. Basically, you'll be able to turn off other players' names, right? And this is for streamers. I know that I'm excited to be able to hide people's names. The problem with this is it's not a full streamer mode yet. It's basically just hiding the names on the left-hand side once you already get in a game. I still want to see a streamer mode where everybody's name is just Meg Thomas, Claudette Morel, I don't know if I said her name right, David King, so that, nobody goes into anyone else's lobbies or chats or like tells them what anybody's running or anything like that. I think that would be great. So still waiting on streamer mode, but you can toggle off the name, scoring events, and hook counters for the killer. So now, the meat and potatoes. There's been a long video already. Game health, the pallet hit. So a lot of you guys still experience sometimes moments where you get hit despite the fact that you've thrown a pallet. And we've all known this for a long time. It's due to latency. It's due to the fact that you throw the pallet and then that gets communicated to the server, but the killer doesn't see it until they've already swung. And so they swing and that gets communicated to the server and you get hit anyway. So it's just latency, communication across the country, and I'll read what they said. All right. They say the first thing to note is latency. The time it takes to send and receive information to and from other players. Latency is a fact of life in any online game. It takes time for information to travel across the country to the players you're playing against or the server you're connected to. This delay means that what you see and what other players see can differ slightly depending on the connection strength and the distance from the server. We do what we can to reduce latency as much as possible, but it's impossible to eliminate it entirely. So how does this apply to pallets? Simply put, each player sees something different. The survivor sees themselves throwing the pallet before they get hit. The killer sees himself hitting the survivor before the pallet's fully dropped. So this is a little diagram to kind of show everything. So the survivor throws the pallet and that connects to the server, but it doesn't quite connect to the killer. So the killer swings and then the server says that that it hits and then the survivor gets, so, okay. The symbols they use are questionable. The pallet gets thrown, the killer swings, and the killer gets stunned, but the hit still applies. Is kind of what's happening here. So they're changing it a bit. So this is what hit validation was supposed to be. I'm kind of confused on why that's not a thing or why they're going back to it. But basically what's supposed to happen now is the survivor throws the pallet, and that hits the server, and the server does a check. The server basically asks itself, okay, the pallet is getting thrown. Was there a hit before the pallet? No? Okay, then it's a stun, and the killer doesn't get a hit. But if it detects that the killer hit the button to swing before the pallet was actually thrown, then the hit goes through. So that's basically kind of what it's supposed to be doing. They say the server will become the judge when either you drop a pallet or swing, that gets sent to the server. If the server receives a hit before a stun, the killer hits the survivor as they normally would. But if the server receives a stun before a hit, the hit is rejected. So, you know, kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. Now, they've changed grabs. Now, grabs have been categorically broken for killers for a very long time. You go and you gotta try to grab and you just go, and then nothing happens, all right? It's basically the same thing. It's latency. Survivors let off the button for gens before you actually press your button, but on your end, you hit the button correctly. The server's not synchronizing what's happening quite right. So the solution is super complicated, and this is what they're gonna do because that latency is just so tight. So the temporary solution is whenever a grab is rejected by the server, the killer will instead swing their weapon automatically and be granted challenge progress. That's important. If you have a challenge that says grab survivors 3 times off blah, 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 then they will count towards your challenge. And blood points as if they successfully grab the survivor. This way, you won't lose out on a hit because the grab was canceled, and you'll have an easier time completing archive challenges that require you to interrupt survivors. So that's basically what it looks like. It detects whether or not the survivor lets off the button, and so it's not going to guarantee any more grabs, but it will guarantee that if you don't get the grab, you at least get a health state, which is not a full fix because, I mean, in theory, you would have gotten an entire, like, you would have picked them up and hooked them without having to chase. So it still sucks, but latency is tough. All right. They say the permanent solution, we will rework the way interactions and interrupts work from the ground up with dedicated servers in mind. Our current system has not been significantly changed since the days where the killer was the server and had full authority over grabs. And that's the big thing to know, is the reason grabs are broken now more than ever is because the server controlled ping. If server had, or the killer controlled basically the ping in peer-to-peer connections on Steam or whatever. So if the killer got the grab, he got the grab. Fuck everyone else. But now with dedicated servers, there are some more checks and balances, which means that killers don't get grabs nearly as often as they should. So they say with that, we've reached the end of this month's developer update. If you've made it this far, give yourself a pat on the back. The changes mentioned in this post will be available in the PTB, which starts next Wednesday. And that's important to know. It's going to be on Wednesday, not Tuesday. And yeah, so we're going to get new character faces. We're going to get Trickster changes. It's a lot to go through. I'm still a little disappointed in the Trickster changes. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And I'll be praying to the end to see you next week on Twitch, where we're going to explore all of this stuff. So have a good one, guys.